Each year, millions of outdoor enthusiasts get a jump start on the boating season. For fishermen, hikers, campers, and other recreationists, the first few days of spring-like weather are the signal that it's time to launch their boats on a favorite lake, stream, or river. Whether a canoe, a john boat, skiff, car topper, or other small craft, these boaters tend to think more about the size of the fish in the lake than about being safe boaters. And all too often, this all too casual approach can lead to tragic consequences. After a long winter, it was exactly the kind of day that Jake McDermott and Rudy Bellows were waiting for. A chance to get back out on the lake, break out the rods and a few beers, maybe even catch a fish or two. Jake McDermott, 43, father of two, the service manager at a local car dealer. His high school friend and fishing partner, Rudy Bellows, a 35-year-old bachelor and a sales manager for an auto parts distributor. Around noon, they paddled out toward the middle of the lake to try their luck at a favorite spot. The air was warming up, but the water temperature was still around 50 degrees. Jake knew the fish held close to the submerged tree and ended up snagging his lure on one of the branches. One last good tug, and he might pull it free. According to Bellows' statement to the police, when Jake first fell in, he didn't think it was a serious situation. But after a few seconds, he realized that his friend was floundering and needed help, fast. But when he lost his balance and fell in, he told us he was immediately disoriented and could barely stay afloat. In the end, it was all he could do to save himself.
Jake McDermott drowned just a few yards from his capsized boat in about 8 feet of water. A tragic accident? Of course, they always are. But a freak accident? Far from it. In fact, everything about Jake McDermott's drowning, from where it happened to what caused it, is typical of the vast majority of fatal boating accidents that happen every year. If that sounds surprising, well, that's part of the problem. You see, contrary to popular belief, the typical accident doesn't involve a large offshore boat floundering in high seas and gale force winds. The circumstances in which most fatal accidents occur are far less dramatic. Instead of big water, the typical accident happens inland, on lakes and rivers, small ponds and streams. And in more cases than not, it's the non-traditional boater who's involved. Fishermen, hunters, campers, people who are likely to be on the water in the spring or the fall months. And usually it's small boats, 16 feet or less, either with no motor or one of 10 horsepower or less. Almost half of all boating fatalities happen in broad daylight and in flat, calm conditions. And most of the time, the boat isn't even underway. Thanks, Jim. Of course, no two boating accidents are exactly alike, but in all too many cases, the common denominator is alcohol. In fact, 60% of all boating deaths are somehow alcohol-related. Part of the problem is that drinking while boating is almost a tradition. The one item you can bet will be on board is a cooler full of beer. But when out in a boat, the alcohol in just 2 or 3 drinks can significantly affect your balance, your vision, your judgment, and your ability to react quickly in case of an emergency. And don't for a minute fall for the myth that beer or wine is any less intoxicating than hard liquor. A can of beer or a glass of wine contain the same amount of alcohol as a shot of whiskey. It doesn't take much alcohol to affect your coordination. And even the slightest sense of unsteadiness can transform small boats like these into highly unstable and dangerous platforms. Under no circumstances should a boat be overloaded or overpowered. And a small boat is no place to stand up. If you have to change positions, keep a low profile and keep your weight centered toward the middle of the boat. Falling out of a boat is always an embarrassing and very often an unpleasant experience. But for the boater who's been drinking, an unexpected plunge could prove deadly. It may be hard to believe, but the inebriated person whose head is underwater can become so disoriented as to swim downward to their death rather than to the surface and safety. You know, the real tragedy of practically every boating-related drowning is that it could have been easily prevented. Wearing a personal flotation device, a PFD, is by far the single most important safety measure you can take when boating. It's a point we've been stressing for years and one that simply cannot be overemphasized. Look at it this way. Virtually every single boating-related drowning could be eliminated if the victim had been wearing a PFD.
Whether it's water skiing or just cruising about, boating is attracting more newcomers than ever before. For millions, spending a day on the water has become a great getaway. But what too many boaters don't realize is that a few hours behind the wheel and a few beers can, in just a few seconds, turn a summer's dream day into an unforgettable nightmare. Harry Lofton's new runabout was his pride and joy. Daughter Jennifer was the skier, but his whole family, dog and all, enjoyed getting out on the water. A little fishing, a picnic, and for Harry, a great way to unwind after a long week at work. According to the police report, Lofton said he started back to the marina about 7 p.m. It had been a long day, and the rest of the family had dozed off. About a half a mile and due west away, Bob Joy and Ralph Coburn were adrift with a fouled outboard motor. They told us that when they first saw the Lofton boat, they hoped they'd be able to get a tow. But as the seconds passed, they began to realize that no one on board saw them, and the boat was bearing down directly on them at high speed. Even months later, Lofton couldn't believe that he had come within a second or two of ramming another boat at over 30 miles per hour.
Collisions, whether they occur with another boat or objects in the water, are far and away the most common type of boating accident. And a surprisingly large number happen not at night or in heavy fog, but when conditions are ideal. So why do so many collisions occur? Well, first of all, it has something to do with the sense of freedom we experience when we're on the water, a feeling that we can go just about anywhere without really having to pay close attention to what we're doing. After all, out here there are no traffic lanes or signals, and the chances of colliding with another boat in all this open space seem incredibly remote. Out here, your body really takes a pounding. You may not sense it, but the sun, the wind, the glare off the water, in addition to the noise and vibration from your boat, really take a lot out of you. In just a few hours, this kind of exposure to the elements actually induces a kind of boater's hypnosis. That's an overall fatigue combined with a reduction in coordination, reaction time, and even a loss of sharpness of your vision. In fact, Coast Guard tests have shown that the fatigued boater takes twice as long to react and perform correct boating maneuvers as when rested. Now, add a few drinks to an already long day on the water and you really have a problem. The boater who's been drinking usually takes far more time just to make sense of what he sees happening around him, and then even more time to decide how to react. On the water, your eyesight is critical, and alcohol only adds to the problem of already stressed and strained eyes from the sun and the wind and the water. Even if your normal eyesight is excellent, you may find that under these conditions, your peripheral vision or field of view is narrowed, and that you have an increasingly difficult time judging speed and distance and accurately tracking moving objects. The worst part of it is you probably won't realize how tired you are, how sluggish your reactions have become. So at the end of a long day, slow down. Give yourself plenty of room to maneuver when other boats are around, and keep an extra sharp lookout, even if you think you're the only boat on the water.
It's a time of the year when most boats have long since been hauled out of the water. But for more than 2 million waterfowlers in North America, it's the start of their boating season. Some may use a duck boat to head out to a water blind. For others, their boat may be nothing more than a dinghy used to set out decoys. In either case, these boaters operate in one of the most hostile boating environments of all, near freezing water. Roy LeGrand, recently married, had not had the chance to hunt much during the season, but he and his Labrador Retriever Skeeter knew this point on the river could be a real hotspot in the right conditions. And as the wind picked up, the birds began to move and come in from the bay. Now, it looked to be the kind of day every hunter hopes for. One last duck to fill his limit. And one last retrieve for an already tired young dog. According to what Legrand later told us, a stiffening breeze and a strong outgoing tide pushed this duck beyond the dog's reach. Legrand said he knew his dog wouldn't give up on the retrieve and soon would be exhausted and in danger of drowning. A crisis, and Legrand knew he had to help. An 8-foot dinghy in a high wind and choppy water. Hardly the right rescue craft for this kind of operation. And Legrand faced the challenge of hauling a struggling 50-pound lab on board a small and unstable platform. A young, fit man and a strong swimmer, Legrand nevertheless later admitted that he thought he and Skeeter would never make it back to shore.
Nothing can prepare you for the incredible and instantaneous shock to your system when you're suddenly plunged into near-freezing water. Your first reaction is an involuntary gasp, a torso reflex that can prove deadly if your head is under the water. Your heart and circulatory system undergo a tremendous strain, sometimes resulting in cardiac arrest. Consider that a man, even without clothing, if he stays active, can survive on land at 32 degrees Fahrenheit for as long as 24 hours. But cold water conducts the heat from your body some 25 times faster. Your survival time in near-freezing water is literally a matter of minutes. In fact, drowning is often not the cause of death of many victims who fall into cold water. The killer? Hypothermia, the rapid and drastic chilling of the body core. After getting back into his boat, Roy Legrand was able to paddle back to the dock. His friend said it must have been his lucky day. But the reasons he came back alive had very little to do with luck. First of all, he was properly dressed for the cold. But the single most important thing he was wearing was a flotation jacket, a PFD, something like this one. By keeping him afloat, he was able to expand all of his rapidly diminishing energy into getting back to his boat and getting out of the water. Wearing a PFD is critically important when boating in cold water, even if you're an Olympic-class swimmer. If you fall in without a PFD, it'll be next to impossible to get one on while in the water. In fact, should you capsize or fall overboard in cold water, your every effort should be directed toward just one goal: getting out of the water as quickly as possible. It's a rule Roy Legrand didn't forget, and it saved his life. Never forget that water assumes an entirely different character as its temperature drops. From an element that is pleasant and refreshing during the summer, it becomes, as it gets cold, one of the most hostile environments known to man. You know, as I look at the accident reports from around the country, it's frightening to note just how many took place in circumstances where there was no obvious danger. A fisherman casting on a quiet lake, a duck hunter setting out his decoys just a few yards from his blind. The fact is, the vast majority of boating accidents happen without warning, at times when they're least expected. Far too many people who use boats as part of their outdoor recreation simply don't realize how easy it is to get into serious trouble, to actually find themselves in life or death situations. If you don't think so, consider that more outdoorsmen die from drowning or cold water exposure than for any other reason. And in the younger age groups, drowning is the second leading cause of accidental death in the country. So if your outdoor sport involves boats, please take this advice to heart. Take the time to learn basic boat handling skills. Courses are available through your state or provincial agencies, as well as a number of private boating organizations. If you drink, you must understand that alcohol greatly increases your chances of having an accident. If you go out when the water is cold, be prepared and know what to do in case of an emergency. If you can't swim, take a course from your local YMCA or the Red Cross. But no one should ever be embarrassed to wear a PFD. It is by far your best defense against drowning. A few preventative measures, some basic safety rules, and some common sense. Nothing complicated, but it can go a long way towards saving your life.